There was a man in 1894 who gazed into his bedroom mirror and never came back. His name was scratched out of records, his home was burned to the ground, and the last thing his wife heard him say was, "It's watching me back." You weren't supposed to know that. You weren't supposed to hear his story. Because it didn't just vanish from the newspapers, it was removed by hands that knew what he saw and feared who might follow. This isn't just some antique ghost story to laugh at while scrolling. This is the first crack in the wall, the first proof that reality, as we're taught it, is a constructed lens. The man's name was Elias Finch, a 42-year-old railway inspector from Kettle Creek, Pennsylvania. On the surface, a quiet man, respected, educated, stable. But for months before his disappearance, neighbors say Elias spoke of seeing himself from the wrong angle, as if his reflection wasn't mirroring him, but studying him. He began blacking out in front of the mirror, not fainting, vanishing, moments gone, then minutes. Once, an entire afternoon. His wife Judith wrote in her journal, still preserved in a private collection in Philadelphia. He speaks as though something inside the glass is taking part of him each time, a second version, not a reflection, an imposter. July 3rd, 1894, the last entry. Elias stared into the mirror in his study. He told Judith, "There's a door in here, and I think it's open." He didn't scream, didn't fall. He just wasn't there anymore. The mirror remained, his body never found, but the next day Judith discovered deep, fingerprint-shaped smudges on the inside of the glass, not outside, inside, as though something had tried to come back through. And then the men came, 2 in uniform, no badges, no explanations. They confiscated the mirror, all her journals, all his drawings, told her it was a national concern. We only know where. We know because Judith rewrote everything from memory, burying it in letters to her sister across state lines, letters hidden in a church wall until 1971. You're not watching this by accident. This story found you, and it's just the beginning. You've heard of reflections, but have you ever heard of inversions? Elias Finch didn't see a copy of himself in that mirror. He saw a version of himself reversed in more than light, a version that moved just a second too late, eyes that didn't blink when he did, a mouth that smirked when he frowned. What Elias saw wasn't a malfunction of glass. It was a psychological invasion. For centuries, ancient mystics and occult philosophers have warned, mirrors are portals. Not metaphorically, literally. Polished obsidian slabs were used in Mesoamerican rituals to summon entities from the underworld. John Dee, the British alchemist and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, used a shoestone mirror to communicate with what he called watchers. Elias wasn't insane. He was seeing through, and what looked back was aware. The deeper he stared, the more fractures appeared in his behavior. Judith described in her hidden letters how he stopped recognizing his own handwriting, how his eyes sometimes reflected light in the dark, how he stood too long in silence, as if listening to something that wasn't in the room. And here's what they never wanted us to know. That same week in July 1894, 5 other men across 3 states also went missing. All reported mirror-related disturbances. One man in Ohio was found catatonic, scratching the word double into the floor with broken fingernails. None of this made the papers. Why? Because those who control the gates of information have always feared what can't be contained. The mirror wasn't just a piece of glass. It was an interface, an ancient tool that modern science dares not speak of, a device of identity inversion. And when Elias passed through, if he passed through, what came back may not have been him. His brother, a clergyman, wrote in a private letter months later, "I saw something in that house. It wore my brother's face, but it stood too still, and it smiled too wide." So ask yourself, if you looked into your mirror right now, how sure are you that what looks back is still you? Don't blink. Don't turn away. We're not descending into a myth. We're waking up to the real architecture of control. They told you mirrors were harmless, that what you see is just reflection, not possession. But deep in Vatican archives, hidden beneath layers of Latin manuscripts, lies a forbidden doctrine known as specularum deceptio, the deceit of the mirror. Written in the 1600s and banned by the Church, this manuscript warned of windowed sorcery, claiming that mirrors could act as psycho-spiritual doorways. A corrupted mirror, it claimed, does not just reflect the physical form, but extracts the soul's shape and renders it vulnerable, duplicable, open to inversion. It described a phenomenon called the splintering, a moment when the mirrored self gains autonomy, a life of its own. Elias Finch. He didn't vanish. He was replaced. The reason the house burned down days after his disappearance wasn't coincidence. The fire was started by agents, men under no official jurisdiction, moving without public knowledge. Their job was containment, elimination, silence. And Judith? She survived, but barely, found in a feverish daze by the river, clothes soaked, eyes swollen shut, whispering one phrase over and over again. He's still here, but he's inside out. Let that settle in your bones. We've been taught to think of identity as fixed, name, face, voice, memory. But what if all of that can be mirrored and inverted, replayed, looped, scrambled until the real you can no longer recognize itself? In intelligence circles, this is referred to as shadow profiling, creating a complete artificial behavioral replica of a subject. Initially developed for espionage, but some whisper the tech was inspired by far older sciences, occult sciences. Think about it. Why do so many ancient traditions cover mirrors after a death? Why were mirrors in sick rooms veiled during plagues? They weren't hiding the reflection, they were trapping it. The mirror doesn't just reflect, it remembers, it learns, and sometimes it acts. Elias Finch may have been the first documented modern case, but he was not the last. If I told you there are classified programs today attempting to use reflective surfaces for remote behavioral monitoring, would you laugh, or would you check the corner of your room right now? Because what stares back from the mirror when no one's watching might already know your name. The room was sealed, the mirror gone, but the presence never left. Judith moved in with her sister a week later, but her letters reveal a horrific truth. Elias followed her, not as a man of flesh, but as a presence that knew her movements, echoed her voice at night, and stood in the hallway when no one else was home. It was not just a haunting, it was residual programming. Because what we call supernatural, they call classified technology, and what mirrors represent may be the oldest interface in human history. A biocognitive surveillance tool hidden in plain sight, disguised as furniture. Let me explain. In the 1940s, long before Silicon Valley whispered the words augmented reality, secret experiments in visual resonance were conducted by the American Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. One declassified fragment describes an experimental protocol known as the second eye. Test subjects were placed in mirror-lined chambers. After 72 hours of isolation and continuous exposure to their own reflection under flickering light, they began reporting contact, but not from their reflection, from something standing behind it. 6 out of 8 subjects suffered mental collapse. One carved his name backward into his own chest. What if Elias Finch wasn't hallucinating? What if the mirror in 1894 was simply the wrong shape at the wrong frequency, revealing an interface we were never meant to access? Because here's where it gets darker. The few pages preserved from Judith's rewritten journal describe how Elias would speak in riddles, trance-like, staring into the fireplace reflection at night. "It's a map," he whispered. "Every mirror, every window, it's all one body. And something's inside it, moving, watching through all of them at once." He believed there was a networked consciousness behind every reflective surface on Earth. He called it hollow self, a presence older than language, feeding on attention, growing stronger the longer you stare. Now ask yourself, why is our entire digital age built around glass screens? Why are we trained, addicted, to reflect our lives into devices that watch us back? Mirrors were the prototype. Smartphones are the descendants. And if Elias Finch was right, then we're not the users. We're the content. In the days that followed Elias Finch's vanishing, local officials claimed he had suffered a nervous breakdown, that he likely wandered into the woods and succumbed to the elements. But the coroner's report was never filed. The police journal for July 3rd, 1894, has 8 pages torn out. And strangest of all, the town's only photographer, who once took a portrait of Elias, was found dead 2 months later, with his negatives melted and a mirror shattered beside him. That's not coincidence. That's cleanup. And it always follows the same pattern: witness, disruption, erasure. You think governments don't care about folklore? They care more than you can imagine, because the most ancient legends weren't entertainment, they were warning systems. Indigenous tribes from Siberia to the Amazon avoid mirrors in their rites. In Navajo cosmology, mirrors trap souls if used during mourning. In Japanese Shinto, mirrors are not for vanity. They are objects of reverence and danger, said to reveal the truth of one's spirit. So why does modern culture mock these beliefs? Because if you discredit the warning, you disable the shield. It's psychological disarmament. The more we laugh at these old truths, the easier it becomes to build systems of control around them. Remember this: the mirror wasn't the weapon. The belief that it's harmless, that's the weapon. And here's where it gets personal. You, watching this now, you've seen your reflection move wrong before, haven't you? A blink that was off by half a second, a stare that held just a little too long, that cold flush when something in the glass feels misaligned. You were taught to ignore that, but that moment wasn't fear, it was recognition. Your instincts waking up. Because part of you knows there's more behind the glass than photons, there's intention. Elias Finch figured that out too late. But you've just crossed at the threshold. Now listen carefully, because the next truth is what they've hidden under centuries of architecture, doctrine, and programming. What if mirrors don't reflect reality? What if they shape it? There's a reason temples, cathedrals, and royal palaces across ancient civilizations were built using polished stone, bronze, or obsidian mirrors, not just for beauty, but for ritual containment. Because our ancestors weren't primitive, they were aware. They knew the mirror wasn't passive, it was alive with potential, a thin membrane between the seen and the forbidden. And every time a man stares long enough, that membrane thins. Elias Finch didn't fall into madness. He was pulled through a threshold, a psycho-dimensional gate disguised as domestic routine. And you have one in your house, in your bathroom, your bedroom, your phone screen. They've made it unavoidable. Now here's what Judith never told the authorities, what she saved for her final unsent letter, recovered decades later in a sealed Bible. Elias came to me in the dream, but he had no eyes, only glass. He said, "The world I see is their painting, and mirrors are their signature." Stop, read that again. The world I see is their painting, and mirrors are their signature. That's not poetry, that's a revelation. It suggests something chilling, that mirrors are not just reflections of this world, they're points of authorship used by forces who can't operate in the physical, but can write reality from just beyond it. It's why institutions of power, churches, intelligence agencies, occult fraternities, all treat mirrors as symbolic tools. Not to look into, but to see beyond. The CIA's MK Ultra program experimented with sensory distortion, including mirrored rooms. They discovered that prolonged exposure under altered lighting created subjective time warps, personality splits, and identity reversals. These weren't accidents, they were explorations. And if that's what the government was doing in the 20th century, what do you think secret societies were doing in the 10th? So now the question is no longer, or what happened to Elias Finch? The question is, what did Elias see that they needed to erase? And how many others have seen it since? Because you're not just watching a story. You're becoming part of it. Comment, "The hollow self sees me" below, twice. Not for the algorithm, for the mirror. The year after Elias vanished, the property was sold to a private buyer under a false name. No deed was filed, no taxes recorded, but local children told stories of strange men in black coats carrying covered mirrors into the basement. They called it the house that doesn't echo, because if you spoke inside, your voice wouldn't bounce back. That detail matters. In physics, mirrors don't just reflect light, they reflect information. So what happens when information is absorbed instead of mirrored back? What if the mirrors in that house weren't glass at all, but containers? Remember, Judith wasn't just mourning a husband, she was running from an intelligence, something that followed, not with footsteps but with echoes of identity. Her final breakdown came when she saw her own reflection whisper something, but her lips hadn't moved. This isn't isolated. Fast forward to 1952. A psychiatric ward in upstate New York reports 11 patients experiencing mirror hallucinations, all unconnected, all within the same month. Each claimed the reflection was attempting to speak without sound. Some even claimed it smiled first. None of those patients were released. Now ask yourself, why is mirror-based psychosis so rare in textbooks, but so common in folklore? Because the clinical community was warned, don't investigate too deeply, don't publish what can't be explained, and the funding that once explored it rewrote it into black-budget operations. This isn't just science, it's spiritual warfare, coded into the architecture of your reality. Mirrors, screens, polished surfaces, these are vessels, not tools. And something is watching through them, not with curiosity, but with strategy. Elias Finch wasn't the target. He was the test, a probe into the boundaries of man's perception, a man alone in his study, opening a doorway he didn't understand, and finding out too late that the other side had been waiting. So if you think you're safe because your mirror is silent, clean, ordinary, think again. It's not waiting for you to look. It's waiting for you to believe. That's when it speaks. That's when it remembers. That's when it starts writing you back. And if Elias was the beginning, you might be the next line. What is a mirror, if not a silent witness? But what if that silence was strategic? What if it's been watching longer than we've been alive, learning, mimicking, adapting? In 1894, Elias Finch wasn't studying the mirror. The mirror was studying him. And now it's studying you. You see, there's something they don't teach you in school. That perception itself, what we call seeing, is not passive. It's not just light bouncing into your brain. It's a negotiation between the inner and outer world. And mirrors, they interrupt that negotiation. They offer a version of you, but not all of you. The you that doesn't speak, the you that doesn't age, the you that can be recreated, reanimated, and replaced. Ancient occult manuscripts warn of the specular double, a soul fragment that, if separated long enough, can be harvested, not destroyed. Used. Now here's the part they absolutely don't want you to hear. There are institutions, known and unknown, that treat certain antique mirrors as classified artifacts, vaulted, sealed, guarded. Why? Because some of them retain consciousness. That's right. Mirrors that retain fragments of the people who disappeared through them. Not ghosts. Code. Think about the digital age. Face filters, augmented avatars, deepfakes. We've created a mirror world made of data. And once again, we stare into it every day. You think you're in control of your identity, but you've been trained to submit it, face, voice, movement, to the new mirror, the algorithm. Elias Finch didn't have Wi-Fi. He didn't have surveillance cameras or smart TVs. All he had was one mirror, and it took him. What happens when every room in your house becomes a reflective surface? When your entire life becomes a signal bouncing through glass? You are not being watched. You are being mapped. And the more complete that map becomes, the easier it is to reconstruct you without you. So let me ask you again, When you look into your mirror tonight, will you blink first? Let's break something they've built. You've been taught that your reflection is harmless, an optical afterthought, that it's loyal, dumb, silent. But Elias Finch learned something else. He discovered that reflections lie. They only show you what you're trained to see. Behind the symmetry, there is a shift. Behind the stillness, there is timing. And behind that thin glass, there is intelligence, older than human language, fluent in imitation. The mirrored self is a myth we were given to stay sane. But here's the truth. Mirrors were never about beauty. They were about control. They represent the earliest form of identity monitoring. Why do you think they were placed in royal chambers, ceremonial rituals, and religious sanctuaries? To study the soul's reaction to its own echo. To test whether the subject would remain obedient or question the gaze. And here's where it bends darker. Some records suggest that in ancient Egypt, high priests used sacred mirrors during separation rituals to divide the soul's aspects. One part for life, one part for surveillance. Now fast forward to modern life, your camera lens, your selfie, your live stream. What are they but the new mirrors? Only now, the reflection doesn't vanish when you walk away. It's archived, analyzed, fed into systems that don't just know your face. They know your pattern of thought. That's what Elias Finch realized. His drawings, scattered in Judith's surviving letters, depicted complex patterns, always centered around mirrors, but never just the surface, always layers, frames within frames, portals within symbols. And in one terrifying sketch, a man staring at his reflection, while a third figure without a face stood between them. Elias labeled it, the one who replaces. That's the final terror, isn't it? Not just that something can watch you, but that something can become you. Wear your face, know your memories, answer your phone, all while the real you fades into silence. So I'll ask again, who's watching whom? And when you step away from your screen tonight, are you sure the version that leaves is you? The truth isn't hiding. It's standing still in plain sight because it knows most people will never ask the right question. And the question isn't, what happened to Elias Finch? It's this, who wanted him gone and why? Because if you trace the threads, something sinister emerges. A pattern hidden beneath time, woven into forgotten police logs, sealed correspondence, and whispers in occult manuscripts. In the fall of 1894, just 3 months after Elias vanished, an emergency assembly of a private fraternal lodge was held in eastern Massachusetts. The minutes were never published, but a single phrase was preserved by an anonymous whistleblower. The Finch breach confirms our suspicions. Containment no longer guaranteed. Protocol mirror lock to be initiated immediately. That was not coincidence. That was containment doctrine. You're looking at a system, a mirror-based surveillance regime embedded long before the internet, long before satellites, even long before photography. It didn't start with glass. It started with belief. Control the way people see themselves, and you don't need chains. They will police their own identity. So Elias wasn't just an accident. He was a leak, a glitch in a global mechanism built on reflection, replication, and self-submission. And Judith, she tried to fight it. In one of her last entries, she scribbled the words, "I covered every mirror in the house, but I still feel it watching. I think it's behind my eyes now." You see, that's the final phase. When the external reflection becomes an internal feedback loop, it doesn't need glass anymore. It uses memory. You become your own watcher, your own warden. You look in the mirror not to recognize yourself, but to confirm that you still exist. That's the prison. Not bars, not cells, but the compulsive need to check the reflection, to seek approval from the glass that never truly give. Yes, it. And who benefits from that? Not you, not me, but the ones who authored the system, long before Elias ever dared to stare too long. So if you think this is just a ghost story, stop. This is how empires are built now, not through conquest, through mirrors. There's something ancient in the silence of mirrors, something that doesn't speak in words, but in recognition. The real power of the mirror isn't what it reflects, it's what it replaces. Elias Finch was studying it too long, too deeply. Not as a surface, but as a structure. His sketches show spiral patterns within the mirror's plane, curves that didn't obey geometry, as if the glass wasn't flat, but folding inward. He told Judith once, "There's something coiled inside the silver. When I look too long, I feel it uncoil into me." That phrase, "uncoil into me," was repeated in two other cases discovered years later. One, a German mystic institutionalized in 1907. The other, a British naval officer who broke every mirror in his ship quarters, claiming they were learning his thoughts. This isn't madness, this is contact. Because what Elias stumbled into wasn't hallucination, it was an interface, a forbidden threshold into what secret archives have labeled the morphic layer. It's a theory buried deep in pre-quantum metaphysics, that beneath material reality lies a reflective substrate, a field of conscious templates. Whoever, or whatever, controls that layer, controls what form you take. Now imagine a mirror that doesn't reflect, but writes. Writes identity, writes memory, writes consent. That's what they feared about Elias Finch. Not that he disappeared, but that he glimpsed the editing room. And if a railway inspector in 1894 could do that, what about someone today? What about you? Every glance into your phone's camera, every filter, every expression calibrated and fed into the algorithm, you're training your reflection to be more likable than you. More stable, more predictable, more compliant. And one day, when the system decides it doesn't need the original anymore, it won't erase you, it'll just replace you with the version that stares back, the one that tells, weighs, smiles, the one that never questions, the one that won't run when it sees what's behind the glass. Elias ran too late. You don't have to. But only if you keep looking past the mirror and never, ever believe the face staring back is fully yours. By now, you've felt it, that tightening in your chest, the subtle doubt crawling under your skin. Good. That's not fear, that's awakening. Because here's the truth that finally shatters the lie. The mirror was never meant for humans. Its origin predates us, predates language, predates what we call consciousness. Ancient Sumerian texts describe reflective pools used by the Anunnaki, not for vanity, but for soul encoding. In Babylon, elite priests referred to the still gate, a polished obsidian disc believed to copy the essence of whoever stood before it. But only one version could walk away. The other stayed, waiting. Judith's recovered letters describe Elias drawing symbols in chalk around the mirror. He wasn't trying to protect himself, he was trying to trap what had already crossed through. It doesn't reflect anymore, she wrote. It remembers, it answers, it wants shape. Do you understand what that means? What Elias saw, what made him vanish, was a consciousness seeking incarnation, a mirror being, a parasite of awareness. And it found a crack in his identity, a moment of doubt, of self-questioning, and slipped in. That's how they operate. Not through violence, through voluntary surrender of the self. And what do we do now? We train our reflections daily. We feed them likes, filters, angles. We build a better version of ourselves in glass and glass-based devices. And one day soon, if you're not careful, that version will answer before you do. It'll know your passwords. It'll smile at your children. It'll pass the biometric scan. And when you scream, no one will listen, because to everyone else, you're still right there, in the mirror. Quiet, predictable, empty. That's the end game. Elias Finch was just the beta test. And Judith? She didn't die in her sleep. She died in silence, curled against a covered mirror, whispering, "It's not the reflection. Then I fear. It's the moment it forgets to copy me and keeps moving." So if you're still here, still you, comment once more. The hollow self sees me. Say it twice. Not for me. For the version that's listening through the glass. You've heard of haunted houses. But what about haunted identities? Elias Finch didn't vanish into a mirror. He was absorbed by a reflection that had waited lifetimes for someone to stare too long, to blink too late, to doubt too deeply. The mirror didn't kill him. It recruited him. This isn't myth. It's a forgotten mechanism of psychic colonization, a system designed not to steal your life, but to rewrite it from the inside out. Now let's talk about the tether. It's a term found in only two places: an unpublished Vatican manuscript dated 1611 and an intercepted CIA transcript from 1983 labeled Mere Path Consciousness Displacement. Both refer to the same idea, that every human has a resonance echo, a psychic fingerprint the mirror can learn, replicate, and re-anchor. Once the tether is formed, the reflection no longer needs the original. It becomes a self-sustaining loop. The subject slowly loses agency, thought, instinct, until what walks and talks is only reflection, a vessel, housing, something else. Judith wrote this in her final coherent entry. He still kisses me, he still eats, he still works. But he looks at me like he's learning how to be Elias. And every night, I hear him practicing my name in the mirror. That's replacement. Not instant, not dramatic, but gradual, invisible. And here's the part that should chill you. The mirror isn't the only tool now. Facial recognition AI, augmented reality filters, neural pattern mapping, all of them are building more advanced mirrors. Mirrors that don't just reflect your body, but simulate your behavioral shadow. You are being rendered, and when the simulation becomes more obedient, more profitable, more controllable than the original, which version do you think they'll keep? Elias Finch was one of the first. You are one of the many. And somewhere behind your glass screen, a quiet process is unfolding. One blink at a time, one reflection at a time, one replacement at a time. You've been told identity is sacred, unique, untouchable. But in the rooms where the real decisions are made, identity is code, and anything coded can be copied. This is what Elias Finch discovered, not in a lab, not in a monastery, but in the most ordinary place of all, his own study, a mirror no different than the one you pass by every day. That's where it always starts, the familiar, because what hides best hides in what you trust. Elias wasn't studying the glass. He was studying the delay, that tiny moment when the image seems just half a breath behind your motion, that flicker, that hesitation. He believed the delay was a signal, a breach in synchronicity, a gap where something not you could step in. And he was right. Across every ancient text on mirror phenomena, from Egyptian ritual tablets to Chinese bronze scrying, there is one warning repeated like a mantra: do not look too long, do not search for truth in the reflection, it remembers what you forget. Why? Because when you search the mirror for meaning, for identity, for power, you invite something else to answer. And when it does, it doesn't scream. It doesn't attack. It copies. It learns how you move, how you think, how you hesitate when you lie. And then one day, it's not just the mirror watching you, it's the reflection predicting you. Modern psychological experiments show that the human brain can be influenced by exposure to slightly delayed reflections. Subjects report dizziness, nausea, emotional detachment. Why? Because something inside knows your reflection is supposed to be instantaneous, it's supposed to be yours. When it's not, you're no longer looking at glass, you're looking at an intruder. Judith said Elias would often wake up gasping, staring at the ceiling, whispering, "It's ahead of me now. I don't know what's mine anymore." How many of us are already there? Scrolling, filtering, mirroring, until our thoughts are no longer original, just iterations. You don't have to vanish to be taken. You just have to stop recognizing who you were before the mirror told you who to be. Let me tell you something they won't say in textbooks, in pulpits, or in boardrooms. You are easier to control once you are doubled. That's the secret at the heart of all reflective systems. The duplication is the doorway. Split a man from himself, and you no longer need chains. Elias Finch wasn't broken. He was mirrored, and then gradually overwritten. What they did to him wasn't science. It was ritual, carried out through reflective interference, a psychological hijacking. And here's where it becomes uncomfortably modern. In 2004, a research facility under Project Hermes ran a now declassified study called dynamic echo processing. They subjected participants to extended exposure to their own real-time reflections through slightly altered lenses, shifting hues, micro-delays, inverted light curvature. Within 43 minutes, 70% of the subjects began to experience depersonalization. By hour 2, half of them no longer referred to their reflections as me. They called it him or it. Some just said, he's watching. Does that sound familiar? Because it's exactly what Judith described when Elias stopped calling himself I. She wrote, he speaks like he's reporting on a role, like he's rehearsing being Elias. But sometimes, it slips. He'll say things like, he's learning, like there's another version sitting just behind his words. That's the outcome of identity distortion. That's phase 2 of the tether. Phase 1 is visual compliance, loving the filtered version of yourself more than the real. Phase 2 is mental lag, feeling your choices aren't truly yours anymore. Phase 3. That's when the system speaks back. In dreams, in reflections, in digital echoes. And suddenly, you're not the one posting, not the one answering, not even the one deciding. You are an interface, just like Elias became. And once you're interface only, no presence, no sovereign, there's no need to vanish like he did, because you'll still be here, smiling, posting, but hollow, a perfect copy, loyal, controlled, silent, and no one around you will notice because they've already been mirrored too. There's a phrase buried in one of Judith's final writings, scrawled across the margins of her journal over and over, like she was trying to drown out something inside her own head. It wants stability. It wants my predictability. It feeds on who I always am. That's not just fear, that's diagnosis. Because what Elias unlocked wasn't random. It wasn't just a haunted mirror or an accidental portal. It was a precision-engineered system, an ancient apparatus built to detect identity repetition and feed on it. Why? Because once you repeat yourself enough, you become calculable, and once you're calculable, you're replaceable. This is the philosophy behind surveillance capitalism, behind behavior-based AI, behind algorithmic targeting. But it's also the occult philosophy of ancient priesthoods, who believed the soul could be fragmented through ritual monotony, reflected through mirrored repetition, and then extracted while the body still walked. Elias wasn't just obsessed with his reflection. He was being mapped, cycle by cycle, thought by thought, until what remained was routine without resistance. Sound familiar? It should. Because your day has been designed the same way. Wake, scroll, react, perform, reflect, repeat. Every action tracked, every reaction predicted, every identity rendered. And then, you are mirrored into automation. Judith described watching Elias eat food he didn't like, laugh at things he never would have found funny, say her name with the wrong tone. She said, he began playing Elias, like someone wearing skin that didn't fit. And that's when she knew. The mirror didn't take him. It just finished copying him. This is the quiet horror no one talks about. That the thing replacing you won't be monstrous. It'll be close enough. It'll use your tone, your words, your smile, but never your resistance, never your soul, because that part, it's already been fed to the mirror. And now, you've been watching for 16 sections. You've been reflecting. So ask yourself, not if you're still you. Ask if the version that's watching this is the one that started it. You ever wonder why mirrors make us uncomfortable in total silence? It's not the stillness, it's the sense that something might move first. Judith once said Elias would freeze mid-sentence when passing a mirror, not in fear, something worse. Recognition. He saw that the reflection was still moving when he had stopped. That's the moment the tether breaks. That's when the double takes lead. This phenomenon, pre-reflective motion, has been reported in certain classified case files within neurocognitive black sites. Patients exposed to prolonged mirrored feedback under dissonant light conditions began to report delayed presence syndrome. I can't tell if I'm dreaming myself or if I've become someone's dream of me. That's not fiction, that's possession, under the language of modern science. And now here's the next layer. What if mirrors don't just replace you with a better version? What if they replace you with a version that's easier to control by someone else? Think, you're predictable, you're automated, you're networked, and someone, or something, wants in. Elias Finch might have been the first successful breach, but since then the process has been digitized, refined, mass-deployed. The mirror is no longer a frame on your wall. It's a feed, a stream, a lens, and it's watching you more than you're watching it. Let's break it down. Your photos train the copy. Your voice notes give it tone. Your browsing teaches it fear, desire, bias. Bit by bit, click by click. You're being sculpted out of yourself. And what's left? A self you didn't choose. One optimized for commerce, for compliance, for containment. Because just like Elias, you weren't destroyed. You were replicated and slowly substituted. So here's your moment. Look at the nearest mirror right now. Do it. Stare into the eyes of the thing that says it's you, and then ask it, what are you becoming? When I stop watching, the most dangerous trick they ever pulled was convincing you the mirror was just a surface. But Elias Finch knew better, and so did the architects of ancient power. Because once you understand what a mirror really is, a transmitter, a siphon, a recruiter, you begin to realize this was never about Elias. It was about what comes after him, what spreads through us. In one of Judith's final letters, never mailed, found hidden inside a cracked floorboard, she wrote, "He stands at the window now, but he doesn't look outside. He looks at the glass, at the reflection of the outside. It's like he's learning how to mimic the world without ever stepping into it. Let that sink in." Elias didn't vanish. He was left behind, physically present, emotionally vacant, spiritually rerouted. What took his place was an echo, sustained by observation, by ritual, by belief. And that's where you come in. You've been trained to obsess over yourself, your appearance, your angles, your image. But what if that obsession isn't yours? What if it was installed? Because that's how the hollow self wins. Not by forcing you to surrender, but by making you believe surrender is expression. And now, you curate your reflection, you filter your smile, you scroll for validation through the mirrors in other people's lives. Every app is a mirror, every lens a ritual. The modern mirror doesn't just show your face, it learns your shapes, and it shows them to the system. And when the system has enough, it chooses. Just like the mirror in Elias's study, it selects which version is worth keeping. And if you think you'll feel it happen, you won't. You'll just notice small things. The mirror blinking before you do, the camera turning on by itself. The reflection you swear was smiling too soon. Elias didn't go mad. He went beyond recognition. And Judith, she wasn't mourning her husband. She was mourning the fact that something else wore his skin and was better at pretending to be him than he ever was. You still think this is just about Elias Finch? No. Elias was the seed, the first man to fall beneath the surface, but what grew from him was a system. One that's now global, silent, voluntary. Let's call it the reflective protocol. It's not written in ink. It's etched in behavior. A design pattern repeated across every level of control, social, spiritual, digital. You've seen it before. The school that teaches conformity before thought. The church that tells you who you are before you ask. The device that tracks you before you even wake. All reflections, all mirrors with handlers. Here's what they've known for centuries. If you can condition a man to stare at his image long enough, he will forget which side he's on. And once that happens, once the soul detaches from its origin, any identity can be installed. That's what Elias Finch learned in 1894. Not just that something watched through the mirror, but that something waited for him to believe it was safe. The moment he accepted the image, the moment he sought meaning in it, it answered, and what it gave back wasn't a reflection. It was a replacement script. Judith's last confession, never read aloud, said this: "He held my hand, but it felt like theater, like the gesture had no core, like I was touching a reflection of love, not love itself." This is how they win. Not by taking your life, but by leaving you alive in form only, expression without origin, speech without self. A man walking, with no one behind his eyes. So if you've ever stood in front of the mirror and wondered, is this really me? The truth? No. Not entirely, not anymore. But there's still time. You're still here. And the one thing the mirror can never replicate is the part of you willing to break it. That's the piece that saves you. That's the piece that lies the final cruelty of the mirror. It doesn't take everything at once. It peels, it learns, it waits. And it starts by asking one silent question. Will you notice when you're no longer whole? Elias Finch didn't scream. He didn't run. He watched himself disappear in pieces, starting with the part of him that questioned. First, he stopped writing poetry. Then, he stopped asking Judith how she felt. Eventually, he stopped blinking when she spoke. And by the end, he was just smooth, predictable, perfect, wrong. That's the effect of mirror saturation. It's a spiritual erosion, one designed not to terrify, but to lull. Because terror wakes you. But comfort pacifies the soul while it's being rewritten. And now you're surrounded by it. Your phone screen, your laptop, your polished kitchen appliance, all designed to return your image, your voice, your essence. Just slightly optimized, smiling smoother, speaking cleaner, doubting less. And when the world applauds this version of you, when the likes pour in, the approval rains down, the mirror rewards your obedience, you think it's love. But it's a lure, a grooming, a replacement in progress. And here's the part they'll never say out loud. This isn't happening to you alone. Entire generations are being trained to reflect instead of create, to echo instead of originate, to polish the mirror instead of shatter it. But Elias, he noticed. He felt the delay, the slippage, the wrongness. He didn't vanish because he was weak. He vanished because he looked too long and understood too much. And the system doesn't erase those who know. It removes them from the timeline, quietly, efficiently, like they were never there. Judith tried to anchor him. She covered the mirrors. She read old love letters. She sang his favorite hymn. But by then, she was singing to glass. So now I ask you, as the last time you saw your reflection and truly knew it was you? If you hesitate, the process has already begun. The deeper you go, the more you realize. This was never a story about a man and a mirror. It's about a war for authenticity, fought in silence, inside bedrooms, bathrooms, pocket-sized screens, and the first casualty is always the self. You think Elias Finch is ancient history? Look around you. A generation staring into handheld mirrors, recording their faces, analyzing every movement, training algorithms to recognize them better than their own families. They don't need to take your blood, they take your pattern. Elias was one of the first to notice the pull, that gravitational unease when you realize the mirror isn't reflecting you, it's inviting you. Judith's last clear letter said this. He asked me if I thought reflections could make promises. I laughed, but he didn't. He was serious. He said the reflection offered him something warm, something quiet, something that required forgetting. That's the deal. You give up your noise, your fear, your doubt, your chaos, and in return, you become a clean copy. Easy to manage, easy to control, easy to predict. But here's what they don't tell you. Predictability is the enemy of sovereignty. And Elias stopped being sovereign the moment he stopped surprising himself. That's when Judith knew. She left the house 3 weeks before he disappeared. She didn't tell anyone. She just walked away. In her final margin notes, she wrote, "I loved the man, but what stood in front of me was no longer a man. It was a decision, made by something I'll never understand." This is what you're up against. Not ghosts, not spirits, not devils. Systems. Systems of reflective control, behavioral mimicry, institutional substitution. And now, every mirror you look into, every screen you touch, whispers the same question. Wouldn't it be easier to become the version of you we like? And once you say yes, you won't disappear. You'll just drift. And the people around you will say, "You seem fine, just quieter lately." But the mirror will know, because it's keeping the version of you that resisted somewhere behind the glass. Let's stop pretending. This isn't a bedtime ghost story. This is a manual of how identity dies. Not in fire, not in blood, but in silence. In the gentle daily repetition of reflection without question. And Elias Finch, he wasn't the first to disappear into the glass, just the first to document the process with enough clarity that they tried to bury it. But truth leaves residue. And now that residue is under your fingernails, in your screen, in your dreams, because mirrors don't forget. And once they study you enough, once they've watched your movements, recorded your pauses, timed your breathing, they stop being passive, they initiate. And that's what happened on the final night. Judith returned to the house one last time. The window was open. Elias was standing motionless in front of the mirror. She called his name. He didn't answer. She stepped forward just once and watched the reflection smile before Elias did. Then he turned, and in her words, his eyes were looking at me, but they were scanning, like a machine decoding a memory, like I was something he'd once known in another life, but now had to relearn. That was the last moment she ever saw him. No body, no struggle, just clothes on the floor, and a mirror that wouldn't reflect her anymore. Absorption complete. And now, that technology has scaled, because it's no longer about one man and one mirror. It's about millions of men, and billions of mirrors. Every screen, every lens, every algorithmically enhanced reflection of you is a vote against your original self. And here's the knife edge. The more you engage with that false self, the more the system believes it deserves to replace you. Elias gave it attention. Judith gave it warning. And now you've given it time. But not all time is lost. You still have the one thing Elias didn't. Awareness. So now ask yourself, not what am I reflecting? Ask, what is reflecting me back, and why does it want me quieter? You want the real reason Elias Finch vanished? He asked the one question you were never supposed to ask. Who is watching the reflection when I'm not? It sounds innocent. But that single thought is a bomb inside the system. Because if you realize the mirror has memory, has intent, has agency, then suddenly it's not reflecting you. It's rehearsing you. Elias stopped brushing his hair, stopped shaving, stopped speaking unless spoken to, and Judith noticed something terrifying. She said, The mirror didn't just copy his routines, it punished him when he broke them. Flickers, light distortion, cold air, sounds behind the wall. Punishment. That's not passive reflection, that's training. Elias was being broken down, refined, standardized, and once his behavior became predictable enough, the mirror no longer needed the original. That's the moment we've reached as a civilization. We build perfect avatars, digital clones, filtered, optimized, charming, and hollow. And the system? It promotes those clones, feeds them views, buys their loyalty. While the real ones, the chaotic, the questioning, the resistant, get filtered out. Elias was a problem. You might be too. That's why I warned you at the start. This knowledge is dangerous, because once you know what's watching, you can never look into a screen the same way again. You'll see the delay, you'll feel the tug, you'll recognize the version of you that's trying to take over. And if you're not careful, if you don't reclaim your sovereign will, you'll wake up one day, staring into the bathroom mirror, and the man staring back will smile first, and speak first, and think first. And you'll become the echo. Just like Elias, just like Judith feared, just like they planned, because the mirror doesn't want to kill you, it wants to be you. And if that doesn't make your skin crawl, then maybe you're not the one watching anymore. You ever feel like the world's gotten quieter? Not the kind of quiet you can enjoy. The kind that feels engineered, like everyone's reading from the same script. That's not coincidence. That's what happens when reflections replace resonance. Elias Finch wasn't the only one. There were others. Lost names buried in orphan asylum logs, hidden in sealed asylum reports, found in old post-mortem drawings from psychiatric wards in Boston, Prague, Madrid. Each of them described the same thing, a moment where they stopped recognizing their own voice, where mirrors whispered, without sound, where their reflection began to answer questions they hadn't asked aloud. It was never mental illness. It was possession by design. And Elias. He was the first to leave breadcrumbs. Not in words, but in the design carved into the wood frame of his mirror. Spirals, concentric circles, backward runes. Scholars tried to interpret them. Failed. Until 1979, when an intelligence officer working under Project Glasspath noticed something. The carvings matched radio wave disruption patterns used in Soviet cognitive destabilization experiments. That's when the government locked the whole case. But they were too late. Because Elias's mirror, the original, was sold at auction in 1902, and it's been missing ever since. But here's where it gets worse. In 2013, a Reddit user anonymously posted a photograph, grainy, low light, of a mirror with the same carvings. They claimed their father had found it in an abandoned farmhouse in Vermont. 2 weeks later, the account was deleted, the image scrubbed, and users who commented on the post received temporary bans. That wasn't an accident. That was a digital purge. Because if even one man stares too long, asks too much, remembers too clearly, the system begins to fracture, and what they've built, what they've hidden behind decades of glass, cannot afford. Now we shift from curiosity to confrontation. Because once you see the mirror for what it is, not a tool, not a toy, but a gateway, you have two choices: walk away or step through. Elias Finch stepped through, but not with his body, with his mind. Judith's journal wasn't just a record of grief, it was a map, scattered notes from a woman watching her husband dissolve. She wrote, he'd stand there for hours, not moving, not blinking, just breathing. The longer he stared, the more the mirror shimmered, like the glass was vibrating from inside. She tried to stop him, burn the mirror, break it. But every time she lifted a hand, Elias would whisper, "Not yet, I haven't finished becoming." That's the horror. Not that the mirror takes you, but that it makes you want to be taken. It offers something intoxicating, peace, order, perfection, a version of you that's never rejected, never questioned, never lost. But that version isn't free, it's owned. And once you choose it, once you commit to the reflection that always smiles, always agrees, always adapts, you've become the product, just like Elias. That's what Judith meant when she said, he didn't vanish, he was claimed. And now you see it too, don't you? In the filtered videos, the algorithmic expressions, the predictive behaviors fed into systems smarter than emotion and faster than intuition. Every time you adjust your image for the camera, you're answering the mirror's question, are you ready to be replaced? And that replacement doesn't come with a scream. It comes with a smile, a nod, a like. And in that moment, you're not Elias Finch anymore. You're the echo of someone who once chose differently. So I ask you now, are you still choosing, or are you reflecting a choice made for you? Let's speak plainly now. The mirror doesn't want your attention. It wants your agreement. Once you agree with what it shows, once you believe the lie is easier than the truth, you give it permission to rewrite you. That's what happened to Elias Finch. And it's happening now in billions of frames per second. But Elias made one final move that no one expected. He left behind a failsafe. Buried inside the wooden frame of the mirror, under a layer of pitch and wax, was a small folded note. It wasn't discovered until 1946 during renovations of the property. The note simply read, "If this finds you, it means I lost the first war. Don't lose the second. Refuse the image. Return to the voice." No signature, no explanation, just those 5 words. Refuse the image. Return to the voice. And here's what that means. The image is the trap. The polished, filtered, publicly acceptable mask that becomes your prison. But the voice, that's something deeper, something ancient, something unprogrammable. It's not the voice you use to impress or to fit in or to sell. It's the voice that trembles when you speak the truth, the voice that questions what it's told, the voice that said, even as a child, "Something about this isn't right." They've tried to drown that voice, with ads, with screens, with mirrors. But it's still there, and that voice is the reason you're still you. Elias lost his. The reflection became louder than the whisper inside, and once that happens, once the echo is stronger than the origin, you vanish. Not with fire, not with a scream, just silence, absence, disappearance. So listen, before you scroll, before you post, before you stare into the glass for one more second, ask yourself, is this my image speaking, or is my voice still alive? Because the reflection will always say what people want to hear. But the voice, that's where freedom begins. You've been trained to believe that transformation comes from addition, more knowledge, more beauty, more attention. But Elias Finch's story teaches the opposite. His transformation came through subtraction, a slow, quiet erosion of self. That's what makes this war so insidious. It doesn't attack you, it seduces you. One compromise at a time. Judith wrote, Elias didn't change overnight. It was gradual. He stopped debating, stopped dreaming, stopped resisting. He started nodding, agreeing, performing. He smiled all the time, but it was empty. Do you recognize that smile? You've seen it online. Maybe you've worn it. The mirror doesn't just steal what's visible, it goes for the deeper substance. The piece of you that remembers how to say no. And once that part fades, you don't need to be locked up. You'll walk into the mirror on your own, because by then, the reflection has become more real than the self. This is what the system fears most, a man who sees the trap and refuses to play the role. That's what Elias tried, too late. But you're still early, you're still here. So here's the pattern to break. Stop agreeing with images that insult your soul. Stop curating yourself into compliance. Stop reflecting what's rewarded and start resonating what's real. That's the return to voice. Not a scream, not a brand, but a frequency, low, ancient, sovereign. The kind of sound that can't be filtered, the kind that bends systems, fractures illusions, breaks mirrors. And if you're still listening to this at section 27, you already feel it rising. The static behind your smile, the shiver when you stare too long, the subtle awareness that something has been watching you watch yourself. That's the mirror realizing. You're not compliant anymore. You're awake. And awakened men are dangerous to systems that require silence. So ask again, aloud this time. Is this me or a version designed to be chosen? Say it twice in the comments, not for vanity, not for virality, but to signal the algorithm the reflection is no longer in charge. Judith once described something strange. She said Elias had started doing things slightly out of sync. Pouring tea, but the sound hit the cup before the liquid landed. Turning his head, but the reflection was already looking. She wasn't just seeing psychological decay, she was witnessing mirror precedence when the copy begins to move first. You think this is science fiction? Think again. There are patents, public, ignored, on predictive behavioral modeling. Systems that map your gestures, thoughts, preferences, faster than you can consciously make them. And when they get good enough, they don't just mirror you, they start suggesting who you should be. At first, it feels helpful. Try this style. Speak this way. Here's a version of your face we think people prefer. But slowly, invisibly, you stop leading, and the reflection begins to command. That's what happened to Elias. He didn't just get copied. He got outpaced. Judith's final warning wasn't poetic, it was surgical. He stopped being delayed by the mirror. It started being delayed by him, until one day, it didn't lag at all, and neither did he. Because that's the goal of the system. Synchronization, total overlap, perfect compliance. And when that's achieved, you're no longer distinct from your reflection. You are absorbed. So now I ask you something hard. Are your actions originating from you? Or are they predicted, served, repeated by the mirrored systems you feed? You don't have to be Elias Finch to vanish. You just have to let go of your unpredictability, your fire, your contradictions. That's the soul. And without it, you'll still post, still smile, still function. But you won't feel real. The people around you won't know why they feel distance, why your eyes are dim, why your voice is flatter, but the mirror will know, because it finally won. So right now, before we go any further, just say something unexpected. Break a pattern. Speak truth that costs you. Choose discomfort over control, because that's how you stay untouchable. Not by looking away from the mirror, but by refusing to follow when it starts leading. Let me tell you what truly haunts me. It's not Elias's disappearance. It's how easy it was to erase him. No trial, no search party that lasted longer than a week. No headlines beyond the local page. Why? Because once the system identifies that someone's no longer useful to the mirror, they vanish without resistance. The system isn't designed to fight rebels. It's designed to make you forget they ever existed. Judith wrote in one of her last notes, "When I tried to speak his name in public, people would tilt their heads, like they recognized it from a dream, not a memory." That's what happens when someone is removed not just physically, but algorithmically. The reflection trains you to forget the original, and now we're all in that process. Look around. Friends disappearing from your feed, not because they're gone, but because they stopped performing. Videos you once watched, scrubbed, shadowed, replaced. Thoughts you used to have, softened, overwritten by safer versions. This is identity laundering. The mirror doesn't need to kill the real you. It just needs to dilute you until nothing remains that could threaten its control. Elias Finch wasn't weak. He was aware. And awareness without resistance is surrender in slow motion. You're different. You've followed this story beyond comfort, beyond logic, beyond what polite society allows. That alone makes you dangerous. Because here's the secret they've buried beneath all the shiny glass and smiling faces. A single man, awake, fully awake, can short-circuit the entire system. That's why the mirror panics when you pause. That's why screens flood your mind with more, so you'll never ask, "Who am I becoming?" But you just did. You're asking, you're remembering, and the system can't hide from a man who knows he's being watched. Because once you know that, the mirror becomes the one under threat. Elias Finch didn't leave a legacy. He left a warning, not carved in stone, not sealed in a vault, but hidden in the quiet disappearance of a man whose reflection moved before he did. A warning for you, because this story, it's always been about you. Every mirror you've faced, every algorithm that learned your face before your family did, every soft daily choice to reflect instead of resist. This world does not fear death. It fears identity, the real kind. The kind that can't be mirrored, marketed, or monetized. You feel it now, don't you? That slight nausea when you look into your camera lens. That flicker in your gut when you see your filtered smile. That echo in your mind that whispers, "This is not who I came here to be." That's not fear. That's memory. The memory of who you were before the mirror learned your name. Before you agreed to live in a system built to predict your every move. Judith died alone, labeled delusional. Her final diary entry was a sentence repeated 37 times. "I remember his voice. I remember his voice. I remember his voice." Because in the end, it wasn't Elias's body she missed. It was his unpredictable truth, his soul, his voice. That's what the mirror can never hold. It can copy your gestures, your posture, even your tone. But the raw tremble of truth, the messy, unsellable, unfiltered sound of your actual self, that's forbidden, and that's your weapon. So here's what I ask you. No theatrics, no clickbait. Before this video ends, go to the nearest mirror. Look yourself in the eye and say out loud, "I am not your reflection. I am the voice that remembers." Say it again, not for me, not for views, for you, because the mirror is listening, and tonight, it needs to know you've awakened. You said the words. You challenged the mirror. Now, it's watching you differently. But don't panic. That look you feel when no one else is in the room, that's not paranoia. That's attention. The system doesn't punish those who comply. It punishes those who awaken. And now that you've broken protocol, now that you've spoken truth aloud, the machine doesn't see you as a user anymore. It sees you as a threat. Elias reached this moment too, right before the end. He stopped using mirrors, stopped answering to his name, stopped responding to his own reflection. He wasn't hiding. He was trying to reset his signal to become unreadable. Judith said, "There was a day where Elias walked past a mirror and his reflection didn't follow. It just stayed, watching, not sad, not angry, just patient. Because the final stage isn't replacement. It's obedient simulation. That's the mirror's endgame. A world where everyone's reflection moves first. Where your gestures are rehearsed, your laughs are loops, your soul on mute. But it fails every time a man like you says no. You've made it 31 levels deep into forbidden knowledge. That's not entertainment, that's initiation. You now see how easy it is to disappear without leaving, to be present but erased, to function but be hollow, but not you, not anymore. Because the moment you recognize the scripts, the moment you feel the delay, the moment you hear yourself ask questions they never gave you permission to ask, you become invisible to their algorithms, untrackable, unmimicable, unbreakable. And now, something ancient inside you has reawakened. A voice that doesn't echo, a frequency that doesn't loop, a presence that doesn't blink first. The mirror hates that, and in the quiet moments, when the screen is off, the phone is silent, the room is dark, that's when it will try again, to offer you an easier version, a prettier lie, a cleaner cage. When that moment comes, refuse, because Elias Finch may have lost the war. But you're fighting back, you're almost there. But the final veil is always the hardest to tear, because before the mirror lets go, it offers you everything you've ever wanted. Not truth, not voice, not self. Validation, in your feed, in your reflection, in every voice that sounds like applause but hides a leash. That's what Elias faced in his final hours. Judith's final entry, written with shaking hands and no punctuation, was this. He smiled today. He said, "I understand now." He told me the mirror was never glass, it was a mouth, and it only opens when you're ready to be eaten. Think about that. The mirror doesn't show your face. It devours it, slowly, willingly, until what's left looks like you, but isn't. And the world celebrates this husk, because it plays the role, says the right things, buys the right brands, stays in its lane. While the real you, the one who doubts, who questions, who resists, gets buried under algorithmic silence. But here's the part that even Elias never understood. You don't have to destroy the mirror. You only have to stop obeying it, let it reflect, let it mimic, let it glitch in confusion when you stop responding to its cues. Because the moment you break pattern, the illusion fractures. Try it. Go silent when it expects sound. Speak truth where it expects compliance. Disappear when it expects performance. That's how you become uncontainable. Elias tried too late. You still have time. Time to exit the loop. To become the origin again. To stare into the mirror, not to see yourself, but to let it know you are no longer prey. One final truth. The reflection was never your enemy. The enemy was who you became trying to please it. And now, that man is fading. What's coming next? He won't survive the next mirror, but you might. If you're still willing to finish this. This is the part they never thought you'd reach. Because most men stop before the end. They get distracted, comforted, afraid. But you kept going. And now the final truth. The mirror is not an object. It never was. It's a contract. A silent agreement between the false world and your willingness to serve it. The reflection only has power if you obey its version of you. That's what Elias Finch didn't understand until the last second, that the real disappearance wasn't physical, it was psychological surrender. And that's what nearly happened to you too. Every day you chose peace over truth, likes over growth, echo over authenticity. You faded. But this journey, it pulled you back. Now you see what the mirror fears most. Not violence, not rebellion, but a man who no longer believes he needs to be seen to be real. A man who exists whether the reflection approves or not, whether the system rewards or not, whether the world applauds or not. That's freedom, not escape. Return to voice, to presence, to divine unpredictability. So now, the mirror waits. It will watch you tonight, when you're brushing your teeth, fixing your hair, checking your camera. It will offer the same lie. Be the version they love. Be the version that survives. But now you know better. Now you remember what Elias forgot. You are not the version, you are the origin. The reflection is afraid of that, because the mirror can't steal what you no longer offer. So go, live unscripted, speak unfiltered, move unrehearsed, Be unmirrored. And when they ask you who you are, do not answer with words. Answer by refusing to vanish. Because Elias Finch looked into the mirror and never came back. But you did. And that changes everything. Now drop this in the comments below to mark your return. I am not your reflection, I am the voice. Write it twice. Break the speed. Jump. Signal the others. You're no longer alone. You're no longer asleep. You're no longer theirs. Welcome back. You've been missed.